It's the 1920s. Cars are shiny, jazz is loud, and money practically grows on trees. Factories are booming, wages are rising, and everyone's convinced the future is just one endless party. America's economy is exploding. You can buy a fridge, a radio, even a house, all on credit. Buy now, pay later becomes a lifestyle. What could possibly go wrong? Everyone's investing in the stock market. Farmers, barbers, your grandma, even the dog's got a portfolio. Stocks only go up, right? Right? The roaring 20s, when people honestly thought Wall Street was a money tree. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. For a while, it all looked unstoppable. New inventions, fast cars, and faster profits. Banks handed out loans like candy, and people lined up for their slice of the American dream. But beneath the glitter and jazz, cracks were forming. Too much credit, too little savings. Everyone betting borrowed money on a game they didn't understand. The party was wild. The drinks were flowing, and nobody noticed the floor starting to crack beneath their dancing feet. Because when you build an economy on hope and IOUs, the hangover always comes. The 1920s were America's victory lap after World War I. The soldiers came home, jazz took over, and the country collectively said, "Let's never be sad again." Factories were churning out cars, radios, and washing machines faster than people could buy them, and every shiny gadget promised a brighter, noisier, more convenient tomorrow. You get a toaster, you get a vacuum, everyone gets consumer debt. People were buying everything, on credit. Buy now, pay later wasn't just a slogan, it was a national mindset. If you didn't have the money, no problem. The bank would cheerfully hand you some, then lend to your neighbor, then lend to your neighbor's cat. Everyone deserved a piece of the American dream, even if nobody could actually pay for it. I can't afford a car. You can't afford not to have one. That sounds suspiciously like a bad idea. Nonsense. Have two. And just like that, America discovered the stock market. It wasn't just for bankers and big shots anymore. Stocks only go up became the gospel of the age. People mortgaged houses, pawned jewelry, and borrowed money they didn't have to invest in companies that they didn't understand. It's like using one credit card to pay off another. What could possibly go wrong? The newspapers shouted about a new era of prosperity. Politicians bragged that poverty was basically extinct. Dinner parties turned into amateur investment clubs. Even barbers and taxi drivers handed out stock tips between customers. Trust me, pal, railroads are the future. Aren't they already the present? Details. Factories were pumping out goods faster than anyone could buy them. Farmers were drowning in debt as crop prices collapsed. The rich held most of the wealth, while the rest of America lived paycheck to paycheck on borrowed optimism. America was like a guy juggling dynamite while shouting, "Everything's fine." Still, the nation danced on. The music was loud, the money easy, and the mood unstoppable. Nobody wanted to be the first to leave the party. The roaring 20s were about to roar one last time, before everything came crashing down. The party couldn't last forever. By late 1929, the stock market was soaring higher than a jazz trumpet solo, and everyone was convinced it would never come down. The trouble was the market wasn't built on real money anymore. It was built on borrowed cash, wild confidence, and a generous sprinkle of denial. Everyone's rich. We're unstoppable. Wait, with what money? Who cares? The line's going up. But behind the glitter, things were getting shaky. Factories were producing more goods than people could buy. Wages weren't keeping up. Farmers were drowning in debt. Still, optimism drowned out caution. Brokers promised the market would correct itself. Bankers smiled, investors cheered, and nobody wanted to spoil the fun. Then came October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. A few nervous investors started selling. Others saw them and panicked. Phones rang off the hook, papers flew through the air, and the New York Stock Exchange turned into a shouting contest with no winners. Clerks fainted, runners tripped, and fortunes disappeared between one breath and the next. By Monday, the panic had spread like wildfire. By Tuesday, there was no one left to buy. Prices plunged like a lead balloon, taking everyone's savings with them. Billions of dollars evaporated in a single week. I had $1 million this morning. And now? Enough for lunch if I skip dessert. Banks had fueled the mania by handing out easy loans to anyone with a pulse. When borrowers couldn't pay, the banks folded like cheap umbrellas in a storm. Crowds lined up outside, desperate to withdraw savings that no longer existed. I'd like to take out my money. Excellent choice, so would everyone else. You mean it's gone? Let's call it spiritually present, physically absent. Officials went on the radio, insisting, "The economy is fundamentally sound." Out in the breadlines, someone muttered, "Yeah, and the Titanic just needed a bigger bucket." Factories slowed, layoffs multiplied, and proud businessmen ended up selling apples for nickels. Families packed wagons and left town, chasing rumors of jobs that vanished as quickly as hope itself. The nation's heartbeat, the constant hum of growth, fell silent. Inside brokerage houses, men stared at blank ticker tapes, praying for numbers that never rose again. The American dream had been built on credit, and now the bill had arrived, with interest and penalties attached. Across the ocean, Europe stumbled too. Trade collapsed, loans dried up, and every country clutched its gold like a nervous dragon guarding dust. The crash had gone global. Stocks only go up. they'd laughed for years. Not anymore, whispered the empty streets. The lights dimmed, the jazz died out, and America woke from its champagne dream to find the tab waiting on the table, and nobody left to pay it. The crash was only the spark. The real disaster came afterward, when the money stopped moving. Banks had been the veins of the economy, pumping credit everywhere. When they failed, the bloodstream froze. More than 9,000 banks collapsed in just a few years. People lined up outside, begging for their savings. I'd like to get my money, please. Fantastic idea, so would everyone else. So it's gone? Let's call it on an extended vacation. With banks gone, businesses couldn't borrow, factories couldn't pay workers, and workers couldn't buy anything. The gears of capitalism seized up. Unemployment exploded. 1 in every 4 Americans was suddenly jobless. Men in suits sold apples for 5 cents. Families burned furniture for heat. Landlords accepted bread instead of rent. Out on the farms, things were even worse. Crop prices crashed so hard they made stocks look stable. Wheat, corn, and cotton were worth less than the cost to grow them. Well, guess I'm rich in sadness, said a farmer, patting his last remaining cow. Foreclosures swept the countryside. Tractors were repossessed, barns emptied, and families packed their lives into rickety trucks headed west, chasing rumors of work that didn't exist. Dust storms followed, turning fields into deserts. The dream of endless plenty was now a choking cloud. Cities fared no better. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Homeless families built shacks from scrap wood and cardboard, forming Hoovervilles along railroad tracks, a sarcastic monument to the president everyone blamed for doing nothing fast enough. Still, Washington promised recovery was near. Prosperity is right around the corner, echoed the speeches. But around that corner was just another soup kitchen. Tax revenue dried up, schools closed, and faith in the system cracked. Overseas, the dominoes fell. America had loaned billions to Europe after World War I. When those loans vanished, so did Europe's stability. Germany's economy collapsed, Britain tightened its belt, and trade shrank by 2/3. Factories in London, Paris, and Berlin shut their doors. Unemployment spread like a global flu. The world that had once danced to jazz now marched to silence. Ships sat idle, markets froze, and optimism evaporated. By the early 1930s, the bright lights of the roaring 20s were out. In their place stood breadlines, dust, and a single haunting question whispered across continents. How did it all go so wrong? The country was falling apart, and all eyes turned to the man in charge, President Herbert Hoover, a self-made millionaire, brilliant engineer, and humanitarian during World War I. Hoover was supposed to be the perfect guy to fix it. Unfortunately, his plan boiled down to one famous philosophy: rugged individualism. In simple terms, that meant, don't worry, people can fix this themselves. Should the government step in? Of course not. But people are starving. Yes, but they're starving independently. Hoover believed the economy would correct itself if everyone just stayed calm and worked hard. Prosperity is right around the corner, he said cheerfully. But the only thing around the corner was another breadline. As unemployment soared past 25%, Hoover refused to give direct federal aid, fearing it would make Americans dependent on government. Instead, he encouraged charities and churches to step up. They tried, but donations dried up faster than the banks. Picture this: Hoover standing proudly with a big grin, handing out positive vibes instead of relief checks. Behind him, a crowd of exhausted workers stares blankly, clutching empty bowls. Meanwhile, families built makeshift homes from scraps of wood, cardboard, and tar paper. They called them Hoovervilles, grim little towns on the edges of cities. There were Hoover blankets, or newspapers, Hoover flags, empty pockets turned inside out, and Hoover wagons, cars pulled by horses after the gas ran out. Even nature turned against them. Drought hit the Midwest, turning fertile fields into dust. Farmers prayed for rain while the wind carried away their soil and their hope. To his credit, Hoover did try a few things. He created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to lend money to banks and big businesses. The idea was to save the top so it could trickle down to the bottom. Spoiler, it didn't trickle. Public anger boiled. Protesters marched on Washington, demanding help. When World War I veterans asked early payment of their promised bonuses, Hoover sent the army to drive them out. The sight of soldiers pushing away hungry veterans became the final straw. By 1932, Hoover's approval rating was in freefall. The country had had enough of rugged individualism. They wanted someone who'd stop smiling and start doing something. Someone named Franklin D. Roosevelt. The year was 1933. America was exhausted, broke, and done, pretending things were fine. Breadlines snaked through cities, banks were vanishing by the day, and confidence was buried somewhere under a pile of unpaid bills. Then, from the haze of misery, came a man with a grin, a cigarette holder, and a voice that somehow made people believe again. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Spotlight on the new president. Calm, charming, and absolutely certain he could fix this mess. Okay, everyone relax, he said with that trademark confidence. Fine, I'll fix the economy myself. And just like that, the New Deal was born. It wasn't one law or one policy. It was a whole buffet of government programs designed to restart America's engine. If Hoover's motto was "you're on your own," FDR's was basically "move over. I'm driving now." First up, the Emergency Banking Act. Every bank closed for inspection. When the good ones reopened, Roosevelt went on the radio, his famous fireside chats, to calmly explain, "Your money is safer in the bank than under your mattress." For once, people believed him. Confidence returned overnight. Next came the alphabet soup. Agencies with more initials than a bowl of cereal. The CCC put young men to work planting trees and building parks. The WPA hired artists, teachers, and builders to make bridges, murals, and roads. The TVA electrified the South with massive dam projects. And the FDIC guaranteed that your bank savings wouldn't vanish again. It was bold, experimental, sometimes chaotic, basically government saying, "We're trying everything until something works." For ordinary Americans, it felt like a light had switched back on. Jobs returned, paychecks reappeared, and for the first time in years, people dared to smile at the future. But not everyone was cheering. Business leaders called Roosevelt a socialist. The Supreme Court struck down some programs. And even within his own party, critics said the New Deal spent too much. Roosevelt didn't flinch. Better to try and fail than do nothing and watch people starve. He shot back. Slowly, painfully, the economy began to move again. Unemployment dropped, wages rose, and hope, an endangered species, crept back into everyday life. FDR wasn't just rebuilding roads and banks. He was rebuilding faith. His voice on the radio felt like a steady hand on the nation's shoulder, saying, "We'll get through this, together." And for the first time in a long time, America actually believed it. By the mid-1930s, America was finally catching its breath. The panic had slowed, the breadlines had shortened, and for the first time in years, the future didn't look like one long out-of-order sign. Factories that had stood silent were rumbling back to life. Workers returned to their posts, pay envelopes reappeared on kitchen tables, and families celebrated by eating something other than canned hope. "I got paid today. Nice, what are you buying first?" "Soap. My wife says if I smell like unemployment one more week, she's leaving." The New Deal's projects were everywhere. Bridges, dams, schools, parks. Entire towns turned into construction zones powered by shovels, sweat, and federal optimism. People joked that if you stood still too long, Roosevelt might assign you a job paving yourself. Out in the countryside, farmers finally caught a break. Soil programs kept the dust down, new loans kept land in family hands, and electricity reached towns that had never seen a light bulb. "Well, would you look at that," one farmer said, flipping a switch. "The dark ages are canceled." Things weren't perfect. Unemployment still lingered, and the economy limped more than it ran. But the direction had changed. The despair was fading, replaced by a cautious sense of control. Americans began to expect their government to do something when disaster struck, to step in, guide, and protect instead of just crossing its fingers. Factories hummed, radios played swing music, and laughter returned to kitchens. The country wasn't rich yet, but it was alive again. While America was patching itself together with the New Deal, the rest of the world was still face first in the financial gutter. The Great Depression didn't need a passport. It happily crossed oceans and wrecked everyone's economy in its path. Europe's banks folded like cheap lawn chairs. Factories went silent, and unemployment lines wrapped around entire city blocks. Germany, already crushed by World War I debt, got hit like a freight train. Their money lost value so fast that it was cheaper to burn cash for heat than buy coal. "Honey, can you grab some money for the fire?" "How much?" "All of it." Desperation grew. In Germany, a man with a small mustache and a loud voice yelled, "I can fix this!" Everyone cheered. The rest of the world collectively groaned. "Oh no, not this guy." Italy doubled down on fascism. Japan started building battleships instead of peace treaties, and Europe became a stress ball made of dynamite. Meanwhile, in America, people tuned into the radio and sighed in relief. "Glad that's not our problem anymore." "Yeah," someone said. "Let's just hope Europe never gets dramatic again." Factories in the US were humming, but across the ocean, others were gearing up for something far louder. Tanks replaced tractors, propaganda replaced reason, and optimism was officially canceled. The world's economy was limping toward recovery, but under the surface, something else was gathering momentum. The Great Depression had broken more than banks. It had cracked the fragile peace of the 20th century, and soon everyone would pay the price. When the dust finally settled, America had learned a few important lessons, mostly the hard way. Turns out, maybe don't let banks gamble with everyone's money. Laws were passed to keep Wall Street on a leash. The FDIC made sure savings were actually safe. The SEC started watching the markets, and new rules tried to stop another financial free-for-all. The Great Depression reshaped how Americans saw their government. It wasn't just a referee anymore. It was a safety net, a builder, and sometimes a lifeguard when the economy decided to drown. It had been brutal, costly, and humbling, but it worked. The country crawled out stronger, wiser, and a lot more suspicious of get-rich-quick ideas. Years later, the world started feeling strangely familiar. Booming markets, risky loans, everyone insisting, "This time it's different." Confidence was sky high, logic was on vacation, and the warning signs flashed like deja vu in neon. Once again, the music played a little too long. And when it stopped, Well, let's just say the world was about to get a reminder of 1929's greatest hits.